You are welcome to yet another episode of HN What's Your Say? The #1 listening show, where we discuss real issues with real people like you. We are still featuring R. Kelly. Real name Robert Sylvester Kelly. Also known as the R&B King. The question that history keeps forcing us to ask is, why does America keep using the same draconian laws to destroy its own legends, especially its black men, only to come back 100 years later pretending to make peace through a symbolic pardon? Why does the government keep reaching for the Mann Act, a century-old law born out of prejudice and hypocrisy, to prosecute a musician who rose from nothing, who gave the world music that touched every generation? Why, in the case of R. Kelly, would the United States government choose to dust off one of the most racially charged laws in its history and weaponize it again, just as it was used against the first black heavyweight champion of the world, Jack Johnson, in 1913? Is this history repeating itself, or has it simply never stopped? The Mann Act was passed in 1910 under the pretense of morality, supposedly to prevent the interstate trafficking of women for prostitution. But the truth is, the law was never about protecting women. It was about controlling black success and criminalizing interracial relationships. It was written in a time when white America feared the rise of confident, independent black men who refused to submit to white authoritarianism. Jack Johnson's only real crime was being a successful black man who loved white women. And for that, the government made him an example. They called it transporting a woman across state lines for immoral purposes. In reality, it was about transporting fear through the veins of a racist system. They couldn't beat Johnson in the ring, so they beat him in the courtroom. They couldn't take his title legally, so they took his freedom morally. And now, more than a century later, the same machinery has been turned against R. Kelly. What is the Mann Act doing in the 21st century, being used against an R&B singer whose career defined an era of music? How can a government that claims to have evolved still rely on a law so draconian that was born from segregation, from racial hysteria, and from the desire to humiliate black excellence? When R. Kelly was charged under the Mann Act, it wasn't because the evidence matched the spirit of the law. It was because the spirit of the law has always been to target black men with influence, talent, and wealth. They simply found a modern excuse to resurrect an ancient tool of suppression and oppression. Jack Johnson was accused of transporting his white girlfriend across state lines. The nation turned against him not because he broke a law, but because he broke the social order. They wanted to teach him a lesson. And 100 years later, when President Donald Trump granted him a posthumous pardon in 2018, it was supposed to be an act of moral correction. A way of saying we were wrong back then. But what good is a pardon when the system continues to commit the same crime against new faces? What good is historical regret if it never stops repeating itself? If America truly learned from the Jack Johnson case, then R. Kelly should not be sitting behind bars on charges built from the same foundation of racialized fear. The Mann Act has been amended, yes. The wording has changed, but the heart of it, the power it gives the government to criminalize private behavior, remains the same. It's still vague. It's still broad. And it's still dangerous in the hands of those who want to destroy someone for who they are, not for what they've done. When prosecutors used it against R. Kelly, they stretched its meaning far beyond what Congress ever intended. They blurred the line between transportation and travel, between crime and consent. They turned personal relationships into criminal enterprises. They took a man's fame, his music, and his influence, and built a moral spectacle around it. A show trial disguised as justice. So again, why use the Mann Act? Because it allows the government to bypass fairness. It allows them to cloak racial prejudice under legal language. It lets them say, we're not punishing him for being black, we're punishing him for breaking a law. But when the law itself is rotten at its roots, every conviction that grows from it is poisoned. That's what the Mann Act represents, the legal version of a lynching tree. It's dressed up in statutes and signatures, but its purpose hasn't changed. It was written to keep black men from crossing boundaries. Not just state lines, but social ones. When R. Kelly's name was dragged through the mud, the public forgot to ask, what does this law even mean? How can a consensual relationship, however messy, be turned into federal trafficking the same way it was done in 1913? By twisting words. By using moral outrage to cover legal weakness. By convincing the public that a man's character and not the evidence is what should decide his guilt. The Mann Act has always relied on emotion over fact, morality over law, and public hysteria over justice. And isn't it ironic that America now celebrates Jack Johnson as a symbol of courage, a pioneer and a man who broke racial barriers? Statues, documentaries, speeches, all honoring the same man they once caged. They call his story a tragedy turned triumph. But if we don't learn from it, then it's not triumph, it's repetition. We're watching the same film with a different actor. R. Kelly is today's Jack Johnson. Not because their lives are identical, but because the system's response to them is. Both men stood at the intersection of talent and defiance, and both were taken down by the same pattern. Build them up, then break them down, and a century later rewrite the story to sound noble. If history has taught us anything, it's that America is uncomfortable with forgiving its black legends while they're still alive. It prefers to crucify them in public, and later canonize them in retrospect. It's safer to apologize to ghosts than to face the living. But we don't need another posthumous pardon. We don't need another symbolic gesture 100 years from now. We need the courage to admit that the same injustice continues in real time. We need to ask right now why the Mann Act still exists in its weaponized form, and why the justice system refuses to retire it. Because the longer we let it live, the more it continues to kill our own. R. Kelly's conviction under the Mann Act doesn't just affect him. It affects every artist, every black man who dares to rise above the limitations society sets for him. It sets a dangerous precedent that success can be turned into a liability, that influence can become evidence, and that a man's past fame can be used to shape his future guilt. This isn't law. This is legacy punishment. The kind Jack Johnson endured, the kind America later pretended to regret. And just like Johnson, Kelly's story will one day be revisited by a new generation. One that will look back and ask, how did they let this happen again? The government may believe it's enforcing justice, but history will see it differently. It will see how the same system that pardoned Jack Johnson's ghost chose to imprison R. Kelly's alive body. It will see how the same country that claimed to have learned from its racist past repeated its actions under a different headline. It will see how America loves to preach to other nations about reform but hates to practice it. The Mann Act should have been retired decades ago, not repurposed for modern witch hunts. Every time it's used against a black man whose fame threatens comfort zones, it reopens an old wound that never healed. The truth is, overturning the Mann Act now would be the real act of progress. It would show that America doesn't need to wait another century to do what's right. It would prove that the government is capable of acknowledging that laws built on injustice cannot produce justice. Because you cannot use a racist blueprint to build a fair house. You cannot use a law born from hate to create love. And you cannot claim equality while relying on statutes that were designed to enforce inequality. The Mann Act belongs in museums, not in courtrooms. It's a relic of fear, not a tool of fairness. And if America truly wants to stop writing apologies for its past, then it must stop repeating the crimes that make those apologies necessary. The time to correct history is not in 2125, when another president stands before cameras and announces a posthumous pardon for R. Kelly. The time is now, while he's alive, while the injustice is fresh, and while the hypocrisy is visible. Because what's the value of progress if it only arrives when the victims are gone? What's the worth of justice if it always comes too late? The Mann Act's continued existence is proof that America is still at war with its own conscience. It keeps saying never again but doing it again. It keeps pretending that morality and justice are the same thing, when in truth, morality is subjective and justice should be objective. When the Mann Act was created, it was meant to police morality and not protect people. And when it's used today, it still carries that same energy. The power to decide whose morality matters. R. Kelly became the perfect modern target. Famous enough to make an example of, controversial enough to be defenseless in the court of public opinion, and black enough for the old system to feel justified in resurrecting its oldest racial weapon. Shame on America. That is all we had for you today on HN What's Your Say. To keep updated whenever we post a new video, subscribe to this channel now. Also remember to hit the bell icon and enable notifications. And feel free to share your opinions with us in the comment section below, and let us know if you would like us to publish your views in our next release. We value all our subscribers' opinions.